Hello, my name's Linda Comeau and welcome to Constellation Interviews for our upcoming conference, October 5th to 8th, 2017 in Virginia Beach. And today I'm interviewing one of our presenters, Bill Johnson. Welcome, Bill.
Hi, Linda.
Hi. Bill's topic for our conference is the Identity Constellation of the Inner Family. And for more information, check out our website, nasconstellations.org. But now we're going to talk to Bill. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Good to be here. I'm looking forward to seeing you again. So let's start off by talking about your presentation. Tell us about the Identity Constellation.
Okay, so in the title of my session, it's Identity Constellations of the Inner Family. And I've put together two different ideas that I've been following from different directions that converged for me. And so the first one is the Identity Constellation. And so that concept comes from Franz Rupert, who's a psychotherapist who works in Munich, Germany. And so I've been studying with him for a couple of years. And along the way, he's changed quite often his methodology as he's learned more and more about the trauma field. So at one point, it may have been called trauma constellations, and he called it constellation of the statement of intention at one point. But now he's settled on the idea that it's really about the identity of the person. So what we're working with is an identity constellation. And the other part of that, the inner family, the reason that I'm in the family constellations part is that I started with family constellations, but I've moved more and more into working with the psyche of the person themselves and their identity. And I found the work of Richard Schwartz, who created a methodology called inner family systems therapy. And the idea is that this goes back to Freud and Jung, but it's a multiplicity of personality, which is that everyone inside of themselves has multiple pieces of their personality. And especially in trauma, we see that people dissociate parts of themselves when they're exposed to trauma. And so there are actually inside of the psyche of the person themselves a family of characters that can be worked with. And so the identity constellation that I'm using is a methodology that sort of unfolds the idea of being able to work with these different parts of the psyche and look at the trauma and to actually integrate the psyche back together.
Oh, that sounds interesting. Is it possible you have an example you could tell us about, perhaps a case study or a current client?
Sure. I've been thinking about this and how I was going to introduce things at the conference. And just last month, I was in Munich with Franz Rupert, and he did a constellation for me. So I feel really comfortable about using myself as an example. And so the idea is this, and it gets a little complicated, and I'll try not to go into too much detail, but it's a very different form of a constellation. It is a constellation. It uses what we call the field as the place where the constellation takes place. But what happens is it starts with what we call a statement of intent. So the person who's having the constellation done actually goes to the front of the room and writes on a whiteboard what their statement of intent is. And so for myself, I had a prenatal experience, which is that I had a twin who was miscarried during the pregnancy. And I'd always been curious and felt a sense of loss inside of myself about this twin. And so I went to the front of the room and I wrote on the board, I want an identity separate from that of my twin. And because I've always felt tied up in what this other person was that I shared my time in utero with. And so then what you do is you take that statement and you take little Post-it notes and write the words individually on Post-it notes and then hand those out to people who are going to be the representatives. So the representatives are not representing people, they're representing the words. So it's very abstract. And then you run your own constellation, and the facilitator is there as your guide and your helper, and to make things pause when they need to pause, and to show you patterns that you may not be seeing, because it's really easy when you're doing your own constellation to get very, very involved in it. So it's really good to have your facilitator there at your side. So then what you do is you invite the representatives into the circle, and you let the constellation just unfold. You don't place people; the people place themselves according to how they feel. And when the motion slows down and finally stops, then you, in your own constellation, go and you speak to the individual pieces. And so what these abstract words become in the constellation is actually parts of yourself. And it can also be part of your family. So in my particular constellation, what happened is that a healthy part of my psyche showed up and was there to support me. There were a couple parts of my psyche that were there that were from the in utero time that were actually quite traumatized. And my mother showed up also. And so, so even though it's a constellation of the psyche, people who are important to you will actually show up. And so we're actually working on the family system a little bit at that point also. And the idea is not to actually get to a solution so much as to show the patterns that are inside of you and the places you may be split and how you might be able to pull that back together.
Wow, Bill, that is fascinating. Oh my gosh, this is going to be super exciting. That sounds, and how long have you been doing this kind of constellation?
I've been doing this kind of constellation for a little over a year, starting last October after being in Munich and working with Rupert again. I decided in my group to give people the opportunity to choose either what we'd call more of a classic family constellation versus this identity constellation. And people were so taken by this format and were making such great progress that very quickly everyone in the group switched over. So since last October, I've only had a couple of people ask for an actual family constellation as opposed to using this method. So I've been really happy with the results.
Oh my gosh, this is so exciting to hear about. It's so cool. A little taking me off my focus here. I didn't expect such a great story. Thank you. Oh my gosh, that's cool. Okay, continue with your presentation then.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll start and I'll give a short summary of what this was like. I do individual constellations also using the method, and I use floor markers. And I actually may throw out floor markers just so that people can visualize what it's going to look like, because it's very, very different. And then what I'll do is, you know, if we'll have a random drawing or something for someone to come up and work. Now, the thing that's incredibly important about this type of constellation is that Franz Rupert works a little bit differently. Someone can come up with anything and he'll start a constellation. I won't start unless I feel enough energy around the actual statement. And so I work with people, and sometimes it's almost as long as the constellation itself, and it's as important as the actual constellation in getting the person to surface the actual thing they want to work on. And it's very, very important because unless they're clear on what they're approaching the field with their statement of intent, we're actually not going to be able to uncover any significant form of trauma. So what we're trying to do is to actually put all these pieces out into the field and then focus on where the trauma might actually be. And Rupert has some different ways of doing this in the past that people may be more familiar with, but starting in April, he did this method where all of the parts come into play right at the beginning, and the person is there inside of their own constellation. So the person has to take responsibility, and they have to have an issue that's deep enough, and they have to be open enough to actually go after that bit of trauma that they want to work on. Otherwise, we can still have a nice little constellation, but it's not going to have any lasting import to the person. So I'm really hoping to get somebody who's got something, you know, that's pretty strong that they want to work on. And I have to tell you that we go into some very, very deep and dark places when we do these kind of constellations. And that's one of the reasons that the people who are really ready and willing to do the work are so excited by doing this, because they actually get in touch with these pieces of themselves that have been split off that they may have been hiding from for a long time. And it's a chance to pull back parts of your psyche together inside of yourself. And it frees up a lot of energy inside of you when you're not having to handle all these parts that are split off anymore.
Absolutely. Yes. And plus people can't do those individual parts by themselves. So you're creating that safe place to experiment and explore. Oh, I love it.
Yeah. And I would say that facilitation in this is quite different. And just so that people are prepared, the very first time I saw one of these constellations, I really had my doubts. I thought, what is that facilitator doing? This is the worst facilitation I've ever seen, because I was so imbued in this idea of, as a facilitator in a family constellation, I was so important. I was moving the parts around. I was even choosing representatives at times. I was giving people things to say. And in this role, you have to trust implicitly the power of what's coming out of the field and how the people are resonating with the parts of the seeker's psyche. And it's very different. And so I'm there to hold space for the person and to give that sense of safety. And I'm right there at their side, but they're wandering around in the middle of their constellation, talking to the different parts and puzzling out inside of themselves. It's a beautiful thing to watch, because they're coming into contact with all these different parts of themselves.
Oh, this is going to be so interesting. Oh, excellent. Oh my gosh, that's cool. So tell me, that leads kind of into my question. Why do you think people should come to the conference?
Okay, well, I have a very, very strong feeling that the reason for this kind of conference and the number of sessions that there are is so that people who come can see a number of different ways of working with constellations and working in the field. And my whole goal in actually coming to the conference is because there's maybe less than a handful of people in the United States and North America that actually do this form of constellation. And I really want people to see it. And so the big reason for coming to the conference is so that you can experience things that you may have never seen or never thought of before. And I'm trying to stimulate thought, and I actually hope to get people thinking a little bit deeply about, are there different ways I could actually do constellations, or could I incorporate any of these ideas into the way that I do constellations with my group?
Right. Excellent. Well, I should have asked this at the beginning then, because now that you have grown so much in your education about constellations and are going to be generous and share it with us, how do you typically describe a constellation now? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but this is a question everybody loves to hear the answer to.
Okay, and I should have also said this at the beginning, that this is a Rupert phrase, but he calls this identity constellation identity-oriented psychotraumatology therapy, which is such a mouthful, okay? So what I see in a constellation now is that I'm using the field that everyone else is leveraging. My own personal belief is actually that we're actually in the field, all of us, all of the time. And that my role as a facilitator is to create a safe space or a portal in the field so that we can go into the individual's psyche and work with things. And so what we do is we use representatives to resonate with parts of the person's psyche, which is, it's the beautiful and almost, it's just the mysterious thing of doing constellations that's so wonderful, is that, everyone is there in the group giving to each other and willing to go in and resonate with a part of of the person that they're working for at that moment, knowing that, you know, they will get back what they put into it. And so I just find it's a delightful place to be and to work.
Absolutely. Oh, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for your time, Bill. You pretty much explained, because one of my questions usually is how people describe their work compared to our theme, how it fits in, bridging the divide, healing the personal and collective soul. But you've done an awesome explanation of your work, and it definitely fits in there. Well, I want to thank you again for your time. You're going to be very busy with lots of people, I think, in your session. This will be fascinating.
It's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yes, excellent. Well, thanks again for your time. And for more information, check out our website. The schedule should be up soon. It's appeared occasionally, but it's going to come back. NASconstellations.org. Thanks again for ever joining us today. And thank you, Bill. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Linda.
Okay, bye-bye.